Welcome to the Mystery Deck. Today's story, The Missing Manuscript. This is the first original story of our channel. Characters: Debasish on narration, Love as Edward, Ankita as Elizabeth, Stacy as Jane, Rohan as Richard in AI voice generator. Intro Evan. Music, environment and direction Debasish. The Missing Manuscript.
On a rainy evening in the heart of London, the city wore a cloak of mist, shrouding its historic landmarks in a veil of mystery. Towering Victorian buildings stood sentinel against the grey sky, their facades adorned with intricate carvings and ornate balconies. Gas lamps flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows on cobblestone streets slick with rain. In the distance, the silhouette of the Big Ben loomed, its iconic clock face barely visible through the swirling mist. A sense of timelessness pervaded the air, as if the city itself held secrets whispered through the ages. The Thames River flowed serenely, its waters dark and mysterious, reflecting the shimmering lights of the city's skyline. A lone barge glided silently along its surface, disappearing into the fog like a ghostly apparition. Amidst this atmospheric backdrop, Detective Jane Carter, known for her keen eye and unrelenting determination, received an urgent call from an old acquaintance, Professor Richard Hawthorne, a renowned historian. Richard's voice trembled over the phone.
I need your help. My life's work has been stolen.
Within an hour, Jane found herself in Richard's study, a room lined with ancient books and artifacts. Richard, a tall man with graying hair and a perpetual look of worry, was pacing frantically.
Calm down, Richard. Tell me everything.
Richard took a deep breath.
I've been working on a manuscript that could change our understanding of medieval history. It was locked in my safe, but when I went to retrieve it this morning, the safe was empty.
Jane examined the safe, finding no signs of forced entry.
Who knew about the manuscript?
Only a few colleagues and my assistant, Laura. She's the only one who has been in the study in the past few days.
Jane nodded, jotting down notes.
Where is Laura now?
She's gone for the weekend, visiting her family in the countryside.
Jane's mind raced as she considered the possibilities.
Did you notice anything unusual recently?
Richard shook his head.
No, everything seemed normal. But if that manuscript gets into the wrong hands, well.
I understand, Richard. I'll do everything I can.
Jane decided to visit Laura's apartment first. The rain had subsided to a light drizzle as she reached the building. The landlord let her in, and she began to search for clues. In Laura's neatly kept living room, a photo on the mantelpiece caught her eye. It was of Laura and a man Jane recognized, Edward Blackwood, a rival historian with a notorious reputation for unscrupulous methods. Jane's suspicions grew. She called Richard.
Richard, did you know Laura was involved with Edward Blackwood?
Richard was stunned.
No, I had no idea. But that would explain a lot. Blackwood has always been desperate to undermine my work.
Jane rushed to Edward Blackwood's office at the university. She found him there surrounded by piles of papers and books.
Detective Carter, what brings you here?
Edward asked, feigning innocence.
Cut the act. Where's the manuscript?
Edward smirked.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Jane glanced around the room, her eyes landing on a briefcase near the desk. She walked over and opened it, revealing the missing manuscript. Edward's face fell.
How did you?
Laura's mistake was keeping that photo. It led me straight to you.
Jane said, securing the manuscript.
You're under arrest for theft.
As Jane escorted Edward out, she called Richard.
I've got it. The manuscript is safe.
Relief washed over Richard's voice.
Thank you. You've saved my career.
Jane smiled.
Just doing my job. And remember, always keep your friends close, but your enemies closer.
Later that evening, Jane was sitting in her dimly lit office, the soft hum of the city outside her window barely audible over the ticking of the wall clock. She was reviewing her notes, her instincts telling her that there was something more to the case than met the eye. Suddenly, her phone rang, the sound piercing the silence. She glanced at the caller ID, unknown number. Furrowing her brow, she picked up the phone.
Detective Carter here.
There was a brief pause followed by a low, electronically disguised voice.
You got the wrong man. The real mastermind is still out there.
Jane's grip tightened on the phone.
Who is this? What do you know about the manuscript theft?
The voice continued, ignoring her question.
Edward Blackwood was framed. If you want the truth, follow the trail of betrayal and greed. Look closer at those you trust.
Jane felt a chill run down her spine.
Who are you? Why are you telling me this?
The voice chuckled, a hollow sound that echoed through the receiver.
The answers are right in front of you, detective. You just need to see them.
Before she could respond, the line went dead. Jane stared at the phone, her mind racing. If Edward was framed, then who had the most to gain from the theft? She thought back to Richard's trembling hands and his anxious demeanor. The next morning, Jane visited Richard again to return the manuscript. Richard greeted her with gratitude, but Jane noticed his hands trembling as he took the manuscript.
Are you okay, Richard?
Jane asked, her eyes narrowing.
Yes, just relieved.
He replied, forcing a smile. Jane stared at him for a moment.
Richard, I need to know something. Why was this manuscript so important to you?
Richard sighed, looking down at the manuscript.
It's not just any manuscript. It contains information that could rewrite medieval history. Secret alliances, hidden betrayals, things that could change everything we know.
Jane nodded.
I see, but I can't shake the feeling that there's more to this story.
Jane's mind raced. If Edward wasn't the true culprit, then who was? She decided to dig deeper into Richard's colleagues and his past. One name kept coming up, Dr. Elizabeth Murray, a brilliant but reclusive historian who had clashed with Richard multiple times over their careers. Jane paid a visit to Dr. Murray's home, a quaint cottage on the outskirts of the city. Elizabeth answered the door, her sharp eyes narrowing as she recognized Jane.
Detective Carter, to what do I owe this unexpected visit?
Elizabeth asked.
I'm investigating the theft of Richard Hawthorne's manuscript.
Jane said, watching Elizabeth's reaction closely. Elizabeth's expression remained unreadable.
I heard about that. Terrible news. But what does it have to do with me?
I have reason to believe that Edward Blackwood was framed. And your name keeps coming up in my investigation.
Elizabeth's eyes flickered with surprise.
Framed? That's a serious accusation.
Indeed, but the evidence is pointing towards a more complex conspiracy.
Jane said, stepping inside as Elizabeth gestured her to enter. As Jane sat in Elizabeth's cluttered study, she noticed a stack of documents that looked suspiciously similar to Richard's manuscript. Elizabeth followed her gaze and sighed.
You're right, detective. Edward was framed. But I didn't steal the manuscript. I was trying to protect it.
Jane leaned forward, intrigued.
Protect it from what?
From Richard himself. He planned to distort the findings for his own gain, to elevate his status and discredit others. I couldn't let that happen.
Why didn't you come forward?
Would you have believed me? Richard is a respected figure, and I have a reputation for being difficult.
Jane nodded slowly.
So, you orchestrated this to expose Richard's true intentions?
Elizabeth nodded.
Yes. But I underestimated how far he'd go to protect his secret.
With this new revelation, Jane knew she needed to confront Richard one last time. She arranged a meeting at his study, arriving early to observe his reaction when Elizabeth joined him. She called Richard immediately, her pulse quickening as she waited for him to answer. When he finally picked up, his voice was weary.
What is it?
Richard, I need to see you. Now.
It's late. Can it wait until morning?
No, I have new information. It's urgent.
Richard sighed.
All right, come over.
Jane grabbed her coat and rushed out the door, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. As she drove through the darkened streets, the words of the anonymous caller echoed in her head. Look closer at those you trust. When she arrived at Richard's house, she found him pacing in his study, the manuscript lying open on his desk. He looked up, his face pale and drawn.
What is it?
I received an anonymous tip. Someone knows more about the theft. They said Edward was framed.
Jane said, closing the door behind her. Richard's eyes widened in surprise.
Framed? But that doesn't make any sense.
Jane stepped closer, her gaze piercing.
It makes perfect sense if the real thief is someone close to you. Someone who knew the value of that manuscript.
Richard's expression hardened.
Are you accusing me?
I'm asking you to tell me the truth. Why is this manuscript so important to you?
Richard's face contorted to anger.
You don't understand. That manuscript was my ticket to fame, to finally being recognized for my work. I couldn't let anyone else have it.
Jane's heart sank as the pieces fell into place.
You stole your own manuscript and framed Edward to eliminate a rival.
Richard's eyes blazed with a mixture of desperation and fury.
You have no proof.
Jane reached into her pocket and pulled out a small recording device.
Actually, I do. Our conversation just now.
Richard's face drained of color.
You set me up.
No, Richard, you set yourself up. You were so consumed by your ambition that you betrayed everyone around you.
At that moment, the door to the study burst open and Elizabeth Murray stepped in, flanked by two uniformed officers.
It's over, Richard. You can't hide the truth any longer.
Richard slumped into his chair, defeated. Jane handed the recording device to the officers, who took Richard into custody. As he was led away, Richard looked back at Jane, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and regret.
I could have been great.
Jane met his gaze without flinching.
Greatness isn't worth the price of your soul.
Jane had noticed that the characters on the fake manuscript were printed in modern ink. This made her suspicious that the real manuscript is not with Edward, but with someone else. With Richard's arrest, the true story of the manuscript theft came to light. Edward Blackwood was exonerated, and Elizabeth Murray's reputation was restored. Detective Jane Carter, ever the vigilant investigator, had once again uncovered the truth, ensuring that justice was served. And as she walked away from the case, the anonymous caller's words still echoed in her mind, a reminder that in her line of work, trust was a rare and precious commodity.
You were listening to The Missing Manuscript, a Mystery Deck Originals. We'll be back next week with a new story. Please like, share and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned.